The rise of today's mobile workforce and the continuing adoption of software as a service solutions has made it critical for enterprises, including federal agencies, to fortify security controls at the edge of their networks. That effort has gained increased importance in light of federal mandates for agencies to establish a zero trust security architecture. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and one agency that has made notable progress in implementing SASE, or Secure Access Service Edge solutions, is the Department of Education. And here to talk about that and the continuing need for SASE solutions are Wayne Rodgers, Zero Trust Lead and Program Manager at the Department of Education, Drew Epperson, Vice President, Federal Engineering at Palo Alto Networks, and Joe Kim, Chief Technology Officer and Executive Vice President for Engineering at Squadra Solutions. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And Drew, let me start with you. Just to level set the conversation, what distinguishes Secure Access Service Edge Solutions, or SASE, from more traditional security methods, and why are enterprises racing to implement them?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Wyatt. We'll use SASE for this so we can get away from the Secure Access Service Edge, so we can try to say some words. But at its core, there's really three things that the industry is focused on for that. And one of them is consistency, right? So if you think about the way we've traditionally done this, depending on where the user is and what security stack they're coming through and what application they're accessing, they end up with different security outcomes, different security policies, and a different experience. And so the first thing is that the SASE implementations are really meant to drive consistency. Any app on any device, any user, anywhere in the world, consistent security enforcement, consistent outcome, that's really what we're driving. I think the second one, which flies under the radar a little bit, is user experience. You could imagine that when we traditionally sent all this traffic through, terrestrial, hardware-based stacks, performance, depending on where that stack is, the bandwidth coming through it, the performance of specifically the hardware, sometimes, and even what app they're accessing, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, ends up a little weird. And so SASE pushes that closer to the applications, cloud-based, obviously being the key, and is able to infinitely scale, which then drives a better user experience. And I think the third one, which I think Palo Alto Networks is very excited about, is just the pace of innovation, right? When you have hardware with standard software releases, and maybe you only update that hardware or that software on maybe a 6-month or a 2-year cycle, sometimes you lag behind. And the real driving force behind SASE is we can use a continuous integration, continuous delivery mechanism to drive new features and functionalities on demand through cloud infrastructure. And so for our federal agencies, that means they get more cutting edge capability faster, and it's delivered as a SaaS application, which is fantastic. And so those are the big three things that usually we track inside of the SASE infrastructure.
Terrific. Thank you for outlining that. And because we want to hear what the Department of Education has been doing specifically, I want to bring Wayne in here at this point. But before we do, Wayne, give us a brief overview of the Department of Education's technology portfolio, and what were some of the department's key requirements before implementing SASE solutions?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So yeah, to start off, I think it'd be best for me to talk about the Technology Modernization Fund Award that the Department of Education was awarded almost 2 years ago. So I came in May of 2022. We received a TMF award around that time. And out of that, what led to getting that award was, first, we did a gap analysis before I even arrived on the scene here. And that gap analysis showed that, well, to what you just said, we had certain tools. We had, identity provider and ICAM solution that did go through a recompete, though. We ended up with a new ICAM solution several months later. We had a data lake with, SIM tools, right? So we can have, central storing of logs and such. We also had some data loss prevention tools, DLP. We had next generation firewalls, layer 7 application aware. And we had a few more tools other than that, but really ultimately at the end of the day with the TMF funds, there was a threefold approach, right? We knew we needed to meet the executive order 14028 and OMB memorandum 2209. And out of that came two technologies we didn't have yet, right? That is SASE, as Drew was just talking about, and also security orchestration automation response, SOAR, right? So that's pretty much what's making up a lot of our portfolio now on top of everything else that I just mentioned. Out of that, moving forward, again, talk about more technologies, we've also implemented an endpoint detection and response solution, that's EDR, on the endpoint. So that's increased our threat hunt capabilities and our visibility when it comes to the endpoints, right? And I would like to point out there, we were able to retroactively, see malware from a couple months prior to even implementing that. So we've made a lot of advancements when it comes to zero trust across the board in the last almost 2 years since I've been here.
Oh, appreciate that. And then following up on that, Wayne, the word on the street is the Department of Education has been recognized for the speed with which it was able to implement SASE. Can you give us a brief sense of how you overcame some of the common roadblocks, and how has SASE enabled more consistent security policy enforcement along the lines that Drew had mentioned?
Right. So thankfully, I had a great senior executive who brought me on board. That's Stephen Hernandez. He's the CISO, right, for Department of Education, CISO chair for the federal government, or co-CISO chair, I should say. And out of that, him along with some of the folks underneath him have had evangelized, right, the need for zero trust even before I got here. My job's not easy, but it made my job a bit easier, right? So from that point, once I stood up the Tier 3 program management office that I mentioned a few moments ago, we started that PMO, and we ultimately continued to evangelize zero trust, evangelize SASE, the need for SASE. Out of that, we set up about 10 to 12 working groups. Joe was a part of them as well. And we were able to streamline adoption of this new technology as well. We ended up setting up not just the working groups, but we wanted to make sure that the general user was not impacted. We had daily lunch and learn sessions during the rollout. So we would have 250 users per day invited to these lunch and learn sessions. We might get 70 to 80% turnout. And at that point, the impact to these users was very minimal because we gave them a standard operating procedure. We stepped them, each step of the way. And I would like to say between December of 22 and February of 23, we had an organic prototype. And that was before the lunch and learns happened, right? That was 50 users up to 500. And then beyond February is when we had the lunch and learn sessions. That's ultimately what drove, I think, the success is, project execution from the program management office. And then as far as the, second question is concerned, as far as enabling consistent security policy enforcement, Drew kind of hit the nail on the head earlier, right? So with SASE, thankfully with the solution we have, we're able to use the same central management console as well that we manage our next generation firewalls with. So at that point, we're able to apply, similar policies or better consistent policies and rules across the board for our SASE solution as well as our firewalls. So that way, when folks are not just going out to the internet, they're coming back inbound, coming into department resources, we have the same policies across the board.
So, Joe, you and your organization played a key role, I understand, in helping the Department of Education implement SASE. What would you say helped them fast track their implementation from your perspective, and what could other agencies learn from their experience?
So we knew before the project started that we were going to be working under a compressed timeline around design, architecture, implementation, and proof of concepts. And we also understood that there's a lot of federal guidances, executive orders, and even change management that we had to deal with. So what we ended up doing was getting the right resources mobilized, literally working around the clock with networking expertise, security expertise, and a team that knew both the solution that was currently being supported, as well as the new solution that we're trying to implement, which was the Palo Alto Prisma Access solution. Another key component that we had to do was understand and baseline the environment. So that consisted of a lot of traffic analysis, ensuring that we're generating reports, and then ultimately developing a policy all while in flight. So in terms of some of the lessons learned, one, it's really understanding and baselining the environment. Those are things that agencies can do prior to moving to any project, but particularly a project such as SASE and Zero Trust. Understanding what capabilities exist today, and then from those, what do we need to improve? What do we need to consolidate and such? So, thank you.
So, Wayne, can you point to any metrics or examples of where implementing SASE solutions has improved your security posture or reduced your security risks at the Department of Education?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example on security, and I'll give you metrics and an example on performance, as Drew was talking about earlier, actually, in another question. So as far as an example on how it's increased our security posture or reduced risk, one thing I would like to say or really point out is the ability to break and inspect all traffic, right? So at this point, versus traditional tick 2, where you're pinholing traffic back through your department's network, we were not able to break and inspect certain types of traffic. We had to split tunnel traffic because certain bandwidth constraints really were a problem there, right? So when you split tunnel, you're not going to be able to inspect all traffic. At that point, once we migrated to SASE, we no longer had to split tunnel. we were able to maintain, actually not just maintain, significantly increase performance while break and inspecting all traffic. And I say break and inspect is always a very important capability. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to see the traffic. You're not going to be able to see what's coming in at layer 7 at the application layer, right? Now, as far as metrics are concerned, again, Drew talked about performance earlier, right? So we were able to open up bandwidth, plentiful. There's plentiful, bandwidth now, right? So out of that, I noticed personally when I started, testing on the prototype, speeds up to 5 times the speed of what I normally would see, right? Coming back into the network, going from old VPN to SASE. Once Joe and the team configured more resources, right, within SASE, I saw that go up to 10 times the speed when I was on Wi-Fi at home. And with that, we've gotten praise all the way up, from deputy secretary on down, and all the senior leaders basically saying the performance is much better on SASE than it was on old VPN.
That's impressive, and I totally appreciate how upper management and your users, they can feel the difference. That's a real testimony to the importance of SASE. Drew, let me bring you back in. How do you see SASE technology and its adoption evolving in the federal market? And what should CIOs and CISOs be alert to in the coming months?
Maybe I would start with just back to one of the earlier answers that I provided, which is the point of these platforms, and they really are platforms, is that they continuously evolve, right? And so, the idea of SASE combining both secure access service edge, but also, an SSE component, secure service edge, and then also an SD-WAN component is really important because, traditionally what happens is there's a new attack vector or a new threat, and then there's a new product, and then the new product is acquired and then tried to integrate into the existing portfolio. With partners like Department of Education and Wayne, our strategy at Palo Alto Networks has been build a platform, authorize that platform, and then drive innovation there, right? And so in the latest releases, we have a full SD-WAN capability, which is true SASE. And if you're following what Gartner did, they released their first ever single vendor SASE, which includes both SSE and SD-WAN. We were the only leader in the Magic Quadrant because we were the only ones who could provide comprehensive capability in a single authorized platform. And so even with the new acquisitions that we recently closed with Talon, for example, organizations who have historically struggled with contractor-based access, do you put an agent on a contractor laptop, or do you allow them to come into the environment with absolutely no security on the device that they're using, which makes application access really hard? New capabilities like enterprise browsers, for instance, we can just fold that in to these delivery mechanisms. And so I think to your question about what we should expect and what CIOs and CISOs should be alerted of, this platform approach is powerful. Right? It's not just us doing it, but there's a reason that the industry is moving to platforms. And it's because we can drive innovation and adoption faster. And so I think one of the things that I would advise CIOs, CISOs inside the federal space to look at is where do you have investments that are working, and where can you possibly consolidate some things that maybe are legacy acquisition and legacy product, and drive toward platforms, because that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. That's where you're going to get faster adoption. And even to Wayne's point, that's where you can go out to the users and say, hey, you're using this today and you like it, and here's what's coming in the next 6 or 8 months that you're going to like even more, whether it's a security practitioner or an end user. There's a lot of capability that's being driven into these platforms.
That's helpful to know. Joe and Wayne, let's wrap up with you. What final recommendations would you offer federal agencies to improve the speed of implementation and the success around adopting SASE solutions? Joe, let me ask you first.
So one, as mentioned before, it's the understanding of the current environment, right? I can't stress that enough. And as well as doing in-depth market research and requirements gathering. A lot of customers that we see kind of fast track this process where they may just use a industry report, or they try to map just the TIC requirements without understanding what they need as an agency themselves. The other is making sure you compare both what is offered in the commercial space as well as the FedRAMP space. This is a major lessons learned that we learned throughout several different projects. A lot of solution vendors, it's different. It's very different on what's provided on FedRAMP versus commercial. And lastly, making sure the environment is ready post-implementation. A lot of times operational needs will change as the architecture is changing, and as you are developing policies before may not be the way that you're going to be doing it moving forward. So thank you.
And Wayne, your additional recommendations?
Yeah, I think Joe hit the technical side very well, so I won't touch on any more of that. But pretty much from a programmatic execution standpoint, from a federal leader standpoint, leveraging the TMF that I talked about earlier, Technology Modernization Fund awards, right? There's still money left over from TMF. I'm not sure how much it is at this point. But for federal agencies out there that are struggling with funding, right, as many are, so you can say most are, going after a TMF award would make a lot of sense, right? And also reaching out to other federal agencies such as, my own Department of Education, myself as a Zero Trust lead, or other agencies as well that have gotten TMF awards to share lessons learned. I've shared lessons learned with probably well over a dozen or more, agencies and departments at this point, and some of them have gone for TMF awards and maybe even gotten them, right? Other than that, then I would also say I used the term of evangelize earlier, right? So standing up, whether it's a program management office, or at least having dedicated government folks and maybe a dedicated contractor team to support them would be paramount, right? So out of that, being able to do that outreach, customer outreach, I mentioned daily lunch and learn sessions earlier when rolling out new capabilities such as SASE. You're not gonna be able to do that as one person. If I was only here by myself, there's no way I would have been able to done all this on my own from a program management standpoint. So again, having multiple bodies, multiple people that understand Zero Trust, but also programmatic execution will be very important, and that have very good customer service and customer outreach skills.
Well, Wayne Rodgers, Drew Epperson, and Joe Kim, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share your respective insights on not only the importance of SASE, but some of the lessons about how to implement it successfully and how that's helping federal agencies at large improve their security position. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.